And we're recording. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Altacast number 26 or 27 or something like that, I think. I don't know. I can't keep track anymore. And today we've got a very special topic with some very new guests that we haven't seen in a while, which is, and we're going to be mainly talking about some of the optimizations and some of the technology we developed for it. So, for new watchers, I'm Boramy, otherwise known as Boston on the Discord, and I'm the lead designer for Township Tale. And over here we have...
I don't know where you're pointing because you're pointing off screen.
I'm pointing at you.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
I'm Serena. I'm the technical artist at Alta. Been working on optimization for the last 9 months or so with Victor.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm Victor. I'm another one of the programmers at Alta. And in the Discord, I'm Vikerka. So some people gets confused by that. And yeah, we're the silent types working on optimization down in the basement with chains.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But we got out. We escaped.
I don't know. I think we're still there.
So Township Tale as as a work in progress title. There's a lot of we kind of we go pretty fast with how we develop things, and we realized that we're kind of developing at such a speed that we're making it hard for us to backtrack and optimize things. So we kind of dedicated this huge chunk of time to work on a lot of tech to make us better at optimizing as we go. And that's what's been the bulk of Victor and Serena's work for the last very long time. And as of the last update, 71, we've just merged that into the main game. So it came with its own issues, but also with a lot of new exciting stuff that we're going to go into in this Altacast. And that should help us make future features more performant. And then we're slowly going to be kind of optimizing a lot of the existing things that we have in the game to utilize that technology at its best. So you've Victor and Sheena, what kind of new stuff and new tools have we got access to now that things are merged?
Like this, it might not sound like a very long list when everybody read on the patch notes. I know when I was writing the changelog, it really didn't look like much. But implementation-wise, they can be quite complex, right? So some people maybe have seen all the atlasing. That is how we congregate a bunch of textures, right? A bunch of the images that comprise like all the objects. We make a huge texture where each object just views part of it. That allows us to better handle memory management because the computer just talk to the GPU, say, hey, render everything that is in here, and then do a single process instead of be jumping around from texture to texture. But that sounds much easier said than done because obviously we created a whole lot of different materials, a whole lot of different textures, and every single object was using completely different references. And some bigger studios like your Rockstars or EA or Activision, right? The way they end up doing is pretty much they just have a bunch of people, and a lot of them just go and hand do every single one of those. But in our case, it was pretty much just me and Serena. So we had to create tools to automate everything for us, right? So it's not like that nobody else does it, but it's pretty much a lot of that is trade secrets. So every company has their own tool, and they try to do it that to suits their needs. Because I could go into much deeper, even deeper technical problems like all the mip mapping and texture bleedings, and that was a whole nightmare to figure out. If anybody that watched this and know by heart what is DDX and DDY and can correctly answer this on the comments, I can try to get to some talents, okay? But
yeah, people are
answer quickly.
people are running to Google right now.
But I can tell you that even then they're still gonna have a hard time. It took me quite some time to actually figure out what was that and how that actually worked. So atlasing was this very big thing, and it's pretty much just a bunch of those optimizations because, as Boramy said, right, we do things fast. We move forward. We try to do as much as we could, and we were quite young on what we were doing, right? So we did a lot of mistakes. And as we now we look back and we all got angry at our past selves. It's like, why Victor was so dumb? Why Victor did this? Why Victor did that? That was my whole mindset throughout for some time. But then as I started researching, as I started testing, learning, we could see how we can be better. And that was like a lot of the process.
I think before we just weren't really testing performance a lot, and then going from that to testing performance quite a lot was really interesting, and seeing how many mistakes that we made in the past just because we didn't know better. And yeah, I mean, on my side of things, like a lot of it is stuff that you might not see straight away. It's like a lot of the LOD stuff. A lot of the town was, and just the whole overworld was like really optimized. We like cleaned up the scene a lot. It was like really messy before.
Yeah, it's gonna get cleaner as well.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to see the difference on that side, but you should be able to feel the difference, hopefully FPS wise.
Yeah, I think there's a there's definitely a portion where in the past we kind of worked with I know Serena and I talk about this a lot when we talk about how the town is built. We worked with very limited assets because we didn't want to create a ton of like different rocks and boulders and stuff like that. But that meant that as we grew out the world, we kind of felt a bit of a need to slap a lot of these rocks and boulders in a lot of places. And I think with as I'm working on housing and things like that, I'm kind of taking a step back from the town and looking at it, and I'm like, this is so messily constructed and put together. Like there's so much unnecessary assets and models that are fully three-dimensional, and you only see so many faces of it.
So like instead of having like one long wall, we might have like 5 walls next to each other when we could have just had one long wall.
Yeah.
And so that would actually cost us a lot because there'd be these different meshes, there'd be inside faces that you might not be able to see, so they didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
Like there was some structures that we just created out of like 20 boulders when it could have just been one.
And like there is definitely the artist part that is like defining these different models, right? But that is like another tool that I feel really proud of how it came out. That is because a lot of times, right, you two just went on and start putting those boulders, and obviously, like if the boulder has like white base and then it like shapes like that, you would not necessarily always put it like floating. You always put it kind of a bit embedded into the ground or whatever. There's always triangles that end up underneath the ground. It's really hard to make sure that every single triangle is visible. And then I had to like figure out a way of actually cleaning all the triangles that are underneath the ground, man. It's a whole lot of
there's another factor that like our game is still really young. Like we still want to add things to it. The town will probably change in the future. So like other games, I think they've really kind of like finalized everything and then they optimize, but like we have to still keep it iterative in a way. Like we still want to like be able to move a house later down the line, possibly.
Yeah. Typically, a lot of big studios, they build up the whole game, all of its environment, and then like optimization is like the last pass that comes out, like that starts like a year and a half maybe before the game's like out for like $90 Aussie on like Steam or something. So like they have like this huge like moment of like dedicated time to just get it to like that shipping line, and then they're trying to sell you like a very expensive product for some people. So for them, they're kind of gearing up to that moment. For us, with our regular updates, as Serena said, we have to kind of keep things flexible enough that we can iterate pretty fast on everything. Yeah. but yeah, I'm looking forward to. There's more town cleanup that's gonna happen. Like I think, you might like back to the boulder example where we slapped like 20 boulders to make a structure. It creates a bit of an interesting shape, but it's a very noisy shape when it comes to what you're really looking at, and then it kind of muddles up the silhouettes of everything around it. Fog helps a bit with that, but it's still not fantastic. So I think in the future, as we build out the world more, you're going to see perhaps more uniquely modeled models, but they're kind of more designed towards fitting the shape and aesthetic that we're going for, as opposed to having lots of like faceted rocks all over the place. Something like that I'm looking kind of forward to is with house building is to give town a bit of a slight revamp when it comes to that sector, where we are a bit more tasteful about how we dress up the world, and kind of like neaten everything up so that there's less rough edges, and it feels like the nice cozy town that we've always wanted it to be.
I think the houses were the most like costly thing that we had in the whole overworld. Like we really struggled with FPS around the town.
Yeah, like that one ended up being quite harsh because it is a bit like the design choices, but at the same time it is a bit of the technology limits, because Unity, being a game engine that is like one solution fits all, obviously it never fits anything perfectly. So it does have a bunch of restrictions on you can, when you issue draw calls, it either needs to be everything combined beforehand or it needs to be combined in a specific way at runtime. And the way we were built, our houses, they simply didn't suit that. So every single house used to be like multiple calls from the CPU to the GPU, and the GPU would always like be running around trying to gather everything, render a bit, gather more stuff, render more, and so forth, and that just takes time. So with all the atlasing, with all mesh combining, and as like mesh cleaning, we managed to get pretty much every single house to be a single draw. So it was just like bam, house done, next, which is much better. And yeah, like those things obviously like come now that we know more. So
Yeah,
it is like a really nice feeling afterwards, right? Like there is the, oh my god, how I'm gonna do this, but then you actually do it and it's like, oh, look how nice I can make this, right? Look how many draw calls I can save. Look how many MS I can save. There's unfortunately not like, it's not a silver bullet, so it's not like, oh my god, now it runs at 90 for everybody at any point in time, because our game is quite intensive, right? You have a lot of things laying around, a lot of objects, a lot of players. But I have been hearing from some players that like this update really improved their FPS, which is a really good thing. It's something that definitely makes us happy.
Yeah. There's a I guess there's a bit of a conception that people have about our game because of its art style and how kind of like I guess simple it looks, but there's actually a lot of complex things happening under the hood with the different shaders and the different effects that we have. And those are things that are not immediately obvious because of the cartoony style, but that's kind of why we say like Township Tale is an intensive VR game, because we have a live day-night cycle and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I think people often compare it to like the graphics. They compare it to like photoreal like sci-fi games, which is like it's sci-fi games. They make use of like more photorealistic textures for sure, but that's really the only thing. Like everything else is much simpler. The geometry is like very, very simple cubes usually, and like they're usually single player games. They usually don't have day-night cycles, so all of the lighting can just be pre-calculated.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things we can't do.
They don't have physics collisions to the same degree we do. Like if you look at some pretty mainstream shooters, I don't want to name drop any games, but if you look at some fairly mainstream shooters that are like semi-linear and they're like in their approach, but they have like astounding like visual effects and graphics, and that's because it's all very much baked in. And the next time you play one of those games, I guess have a look at how much you can interact with the environment and the world and the way lighting behaves. Like if you're playing a shooter, like are you able to destroy this wall, and then now the sunlight beams through this hole, and then it illuminates the room inside that you're in. Is that something that the game supports, or do your bullets not kind of do impacts? There's some recently released games that people have a lot of gripes about, based on a lot of the like reactions to player actions, I suppose.
There is like another big part, right? I still remember this. At one stage, I was talking to this like former physics engineer that used to work for a bunch of different games. Also, not gonna name drop anything, but he was telling me like how they used to do it. It was a very high budget game, and the way they would do is like you have the player walking around this world. It's a single player game. Everything that is around the player has actual collisions. Everything that is a bit further away from the player is a single huge object mesh thing by itself, because the player is not there. So nothing there is actually going to happen. Nothing happens if the player don't go there. Therefore, it is cheap. It is pretty much free. But as soon as the player approaches a wall, that wall decimates into the wall that you actually see, physics-wise, and then you can actually interact with it. That's why suddenly you can shoot at it or what's or not, but until you actually interact with something, it does not exist for all intents and purposes. And in our game, that is something that is very different. You might be just in town, and a spriggle somewhere actually go and is attacking an enemy, or it's doing something that can drop and come to you. So things, or world or game happens regardless of the players, and the players are part of this.
Would you call that persistent?
I wouldn't say that is necessarily because it's not necessarily a persistency, because even on the other end, you can always freeze the world until the player actually comes back. But what we do is that, as I said, the world is persistently happening around you, and that is the beauty of it. I can be inside this town and think something can be happening outside of me. Very few games actually simulate physically that.
Yeah. Obviously there's still an aspect that, if I'm in town and you're in the caves, my client's not trying to render and run all the stuff that's happening in the caves. So we do have a bit of a distinction, but on the server side, all of those events are all happening all at once. And that's how we're able to kind of feedback that information. When you do finally go to the caves, I can see all the results of what Serena and Victor have done in the trials or something, for example. So that's one of the other ways that we've been optimizing that, and we've been doing that for since the game's been released, pretty much.
Yes.
That's the oldest, one of the first major things we did. So what kind of pipelines are involved now with optimizing the game? Because obviously there's lots of mesh merging and a lot of atlasing that happens. At which point in the production process does that happen? I'm asking for I'm asking for the people who are watching and don't know, because obviously I totally know.
Before something comes out to players, it should be optimized fully.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing, it is we try to bring a lot of new good practices. So when artists and designers are actually designing something, we are trying to change a bit the mindset. Instead of always just putting more and more and more, we're trying to put what is needed to convey the experience and the feeling we want to convey. And that is the important part, right? So maybe a specific small little pebble on the ground might not be needed, because you would normally just ignore it. It could even just be a little texture, it would be fine, instead of having physics and what's not. Especially because normally you just zip right past through it. But in some other cases, you might need that pebble because it might be a button, it might be a hidden button. But in that case, that's what we want to convey. Those design changes is what we're trying to drive in the very beginning of the pipeline. But after that, we also have another entry point that's very at the end of the pipelines. That is when we're hitting that build button. It is when we are like go through and we reprocess every single asset and we change it from whatever it currently is to a bit more optimized state, where we do atlasing, we do mesh combining, we do everything that is needed.
Yeah. So
Yeah, like we.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like previously, we didn't create things like different level of detail models for a lot of our assets. A lot of our assets in like the first year of production just had one high poly version that would render high poly if you were like really far away. So now we're starting to get into the habit of like creating those lower poly models straight away whenever we create the high poly one, and thinking about, you know, like limiting the amount of materials we use or using cheaper materials, stuff like that.
So what exactly is a material, Serena?
Good question.
Just because people might understand the difference between textures and materials.
I can actually answer that.
Go ahead.
And I'm gonna even introduce another thing that is shaders.
Oh yeah.
That's my job. So a material is actually a conglomerate of shader, textures, and parameters. So when I have a 3D model, right, so I have a wall for that matter, I have a material that has all the information on how to render that wall. It has all the textures it's going to use, it has all the shaders that are the actual instructions, it has all the parameters because the texture might be stretched, might be compressed, it might be offset. So material is all that information, consider instructions, textures, and parameters on how to render a 3D model.
Okay, so what's
parameters might be like
Yeah.
how smooth it is, how metallic it is, things like that as well.
Yeah.
So you can have the same texture on multiple materials. You could have like a wood material that uses the same texture as a different wood material, but one of them might have different parameters, or a material might use a different shader or something like that.
Yeah. So, what are some examples of some different shaders that we have in the game? Like, describe some that players will know about rather than like
well,
see
we're trying
subconsciously.
to limit it. So with the latest update, Victor has a simple. It's called simple standard shader, and we try to use that wherever.
But the thing is, everything that is just as it is, right? So like a wall, the rocks, flint, they just use the simple standard because it's a simple. You look at it and it is what it is. But every sword that you carry, everything that you can forge, that you need to go and blacksmith it, that use our metal shader. That is a shader that Joe wrote that do all the mesh deformation. So it's not like we have multiple 3D models. We actually do all that animation on the shader. So when you have wood cuttings, another one that Joe made, that actually like modifies the tree to show you where you're cutting. When you look at you repair the elevators and you see like them fading in and out, it's a shader I did that just creates all those animations. So we have like fancy ones, but we also have the
and then we try to have one shader for all of the wind foliage.
Yep.
So that it just sways in the breeze. It just moves the vertexes around and
Yep.
And it has a different lighting.
Yeah, and it has like a bit of a softer lighting so that they look a little bit semi-translucent. And then of course there's like water as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially with shaders we can create a lot of like special effects that can deform the mesh. It can make it glow. It changes how it reacts to lighting. That's like, for example, our walls might be sheer, but then if you shine a light, you might see a bit of like a underglow underneath the bricks, and that's done through a normal map. That like some shaders that we use have that, some others don't. And and all of those things get put onto what are basically like gray blobs of like models that we've made, and then it kind of makes it look like something that exists in the world and has lots of those different things. Anybody familiar with game dev will roughly know what a material is, but it's a lot of something that you don't always see from like out of the box game engines like Unity and Unreal Engine is like how fancy they can get. You can do some really crazy stuff with shaders, so that you don't have to like hand animate different things. Like if, for example, the when you throw a page out and the book appears and then it kind of like swirls into itself, that's another shader that Victor wrote that pretty much handles that. So we
Some
didn't animate that.
Some games use shaders to animate their characters. Like they might have a bunch of bugs in the scene and they have thousands of bugs in there, and you think it's all like skinned with like skeletons and joints and things like that, but a lot of the time it's just a shader that's moving vertexes around of like
like can I name drop a game in a good way?
Is it Abzu?
If anybody played Abzu,
yeah.
like I recently watched their GDC presentation and it's just amazing the work they do. Every single fish is animated via shader. So nothing is animated on the CPU, it's all on the GPU, and it's beautifully done.
Yeah.
It is just a very good design and implementation.
And it makes it like way cheaper, right?
Yeah, because
really
I think the fish in Abzu are not skinned at all, right? They're just using. So to explain what the shader does.
A shader gives you a headache, okay? Like you write it, it's a black box, nothing makes sense until it does.
Yeah, so this is the fish, for example. And then what it does is like the vertices running along this fish, they move it kind of like up and down or like sideways and stuff like that to kind of give it the rippling that fish do. And normally, like if you were to do it without a shader, you would have a spine, like a bone structure inside it that is assigned to, with the vertices assigned weights to those bones, and so that when you move those bones, those vertices with the fish move. But by doing it with a shader, you don't have to make it a skin mesh, which means that it works a lot better with combining meshes together and like getting single draw calls out of all those fish, because skin renders are like they can't batch together.
When I said that the town was the most expensive
you take that back.
I take that back. It's when there's lots and lots of enemies on screen at once. And that's something that hopefully you'll see improvements on, because before this update, we had a lot of enemies that had multiple skinned meshes per character. And it was like, for every enemy that appeared on screen, we'd have to be using like 12 draw calls or something like that. So now hopefully everything uses like one each.
Yes.
Yep.
So like it's obviously it's not 100% perfect. Like perfect in the sense that like it's ridiculously cheap to render, but it's much cheaper. So because another thing that we do want to try is we don't want to ruin the game that we currently have. We do like when we do appreciate the visuals and how it looks, the current game, and we want to keep that fidelity in there. We want to make it cheaper, yes, but we do want to try to keep some of the fidelity, or most of it, or all of it if possible. So we only cut what we really looking like, oh, these are situations that are never happen or won't happen for a couple of seconds, or it's not necessarily like. I do realize some people were complaining about the dynamite, that the dynamite now looks a little bit off. It is like just a couple of the color itself is just a tiny little bit different, just because Serena did a change in it. And that
I wanted to reuse a material, so the more materials that you reuse, the better off. You don't want to be creating new textures and new materials for every single asset that you put into the game. So I've kind of cut back, and like we're trying to cut back going forward the amount of new things that we put in there. So yeah, there will be like a texture change on the dynamite, for example, but the fact that that's one of the only things we actually noticeably changed. It's like pretty cool.
Yeah, there's another aspect that we're trying to capitalize on with the game, in the sense that because everything's going to be craftable to some degree, by keeping like the original material of like the woodcuttery going all the way through like all the different stuff you're making, kind of helps us put that together as well. So I think eventually when you can craft dynamite, it might see another texture change, because it will probably use the textures that like you might like the same texture that you're making your handles out of, if it's made out of wood, or depending on the objects.
Yeah, you should be able to look at an object in game and say, okay, I know exactly what material that's crafted out of.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so I think the next, as far as like what the future of optimization has in store for us, there's a bit more of like tweaking existing assets to make them fit within the optimization tools a bit better. There's a big pass that's probably going to come when housing rolls out, because there's a lot of kind of system changes to how we want to do buildings that comes from that, and that's part of the reason why we've held off on like doing a huge kind of like asset rework on houses before now. It's because we knew that we were going to want to redo it when housing comes out, and so now this gives us kind of a good chance for that. Well, yeah, I think that we've just about hit the half-hour mark. You guys have anything more to say before we move on to the Q&A?
Thanks for the feedback, everyone.
Yes, like thanks for the patience, because we know there is a lot of bugs. Like potentially not as many as there could have been, but because me and Serena ended up pretty much changing the entire game and building it back, we obviously did some mistakes. So sometimes some people are saying, hey, we have way more worms than we used to have. Yes, because I made a change and I forgot to undo it. Its worm spawn rate increased by 185%. So,
and like a lot of changes to meshes were made, so some things were offset or whatever. But yeah, in general, we're really glad to hear that people are having a better experience with performance. That's nice.
And I think by now, like at least one hotfix will be out, maybe another. We'll see how early next week goes. So we are continuously kind of working, like if we want to release something that has so many drastic changes, we try and be on top of like fixing it pretty fast. But yeah, thanks a lot, Serena and Victor, for joining me for this Altacast. And hopefully it won't be so long until the next time you appear as guest stars. And yeah, now I'm going to move on to the Q&A, and Joel's going to join me in a second. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll be back shortly.
see you.
And we are on. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Q&A section. I'm joined now with Joel, and we're going to answer some questions. Yep. Simple. All right. Oh yeah, this is, I guess maybe we'll introduce you, since you haven't been introduced this Altacast yet.
I'm lead programmer at Alta. I'm currently working on house building stuff with Boramy. You can see our last Altacast if you want to hear more about that.
Yeah. Cool.
Do we want to skip house building related questions, and save them for next time, or do we want to take them on now?
We'll get there's quite a few questions. I think not that many of them are house related, so I think we can quite a number. It's a good mix. I think we'll prioritize non-housing questions, and then we'll see how we do for time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Question number 1: what do you want the game to be like in 5 years' time?
All right, well, there goes the next half hour of our time.
Yeah.
So 5 years is a long time.
5 years is a long time.
There's a lot we can do. There's a lot of new things that could happen in the next 5 years.
If you want to get an idea of how long 5 years is, there are currently unborn babies who will be in school in 5 years' time. Like, 5 years is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, there's so like in 5 years' time, I'd like a Township Tale to be pretty much complete when it comes to like the experience of it. That's like my optimistic goal for it, and that means that we have a lot of the features that are on the roadmap. That there's this really great cyclical loop of going out to adventure into these procedural dungeons, being able to make them harder based on how far into the elder game you are.
Fight bosses.
Yeah, fight bosses that have grown in strength because you're like super far into the game. For you to be able to have your own like mounts, your houses are super decked out. Just the absolute vision of a Township Tale is what I'd like to see in 5 years. Like the whole world being filled out, people going on crazy adventures, and every point, whenever somebody embarks on something in a Township Tale, when it's like done, I want them to be amazed at what they're doing. Like for them to think like, I can't believe that when I started this game I was bashing 2 rocks together to make a fire.
Yeah.
And now I've got these amazing skills that I'm like slaying dragons and riding horses across these plains and solving like complex physics puzzles and just tons of like really lots of, almost like if you take every adventure game you've ever played and you just mash them up in one gumbo box. Yeah, all the best bits. That's what a Township Tale, I think, is aiming to be in the future. What about your 5 years? Is that pretty much the same deal?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a bit scary if mine was completely different. I think from a more like stepped back perspective, I'm keen to see like the community keep growing and the community, I don't know, having all sorts of like tips and tricks. I like the idea of there being a bit more, like the idea that, and this is not me making promises, Boramy's the one who makes decisions. You can take his word on what he said. Anything I say, take with a grain of salt. But I like the idea of the game server owners being able to have different maps, for instance. Right now we just have the main world, but there is a tutorial world, but you can't have that as your own server. But I like the idea of not necessarily equivalence to the main map. Like I'm not saying that that's anything we'll be supporting, maybe one day, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about like, I'd love, a tavern, just a tavern server, which is just one giant tavern, just to hang out with people, like more of a social experience. Those sorts of things where not only is Township Tale everything Boramy just said in terms of an adventure experience, but there's also other experiences you can come to Township Tale for.
Yeah.
Just hanging out with friends, whether that be on a main server or not.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on like how populated the game gets and how big VR becomes in 5 years. Because obviously, like as we're building out this huge like Alta's universe, essentially, with like a Township Tale, like the tavern level that Joel talked about, as well as like the crazy adventure game that we're building. We don't want to over divide people, but hopefully VR is going to reach a point where it's like so saturated with players that that's never a problem. And that drives a lot of the reasons why we do stuff and why we're building towards it. It's the biggest reason why the game is free, is so that we can get people on board and there's zero friction to joining this this journey that we're embarking on. All right.
Okay.
Next question.
We need more colors, like the old color system with customization. So for those who don't know, the old color system kind of had like a color wheel that you could go through, and then you actually dipped cosmetics into the bucket of paint to change their color. I mean, for a bit of context, I can explain some of the differences between the new system and the old system. The old system, I think, only really had hues. I don't think it had different brightnesses and darknesses of colors. But something else is the old color system. Each color was just one color, really. Whereas on our color board, whenever you see a single color, whenever you're painting, say, the darkest green off the color board, you're actually painting a gradient of green. So it's not actually that there's 48 colors, it's that there's 48 gradients. So there's a bit more tech, and it wouldn't work exactly the same with a color picker.
Yeah.
And then I think there's something to be said for artistic sort of design, in that we've tried to choose a palette that works quite well for a lot of things. I'm not sure if Boramy at times has talked about potentially changing up the color palette a bit, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, like there's
how serious he is about that.
There's minor tweaks that I can see doing that like most people would not notice at all. When it comes to part of the problem with the old color customization is actually you had less colors than what you do now. You had to select from a gradient of 8 colors and their transitions between, which is a lot of like different values, but out of like hard colors that you can get to, it was less. And it just like it just wasn't like a great way to kind of know what color you're going to next. It was just lots of interaction things that weren't fantastic about it. The thing we like about the palette is that it's a bit more controlled. You can tell someone how to replicate it. It's a bit more like it's easier to converse about it. It's like, oh, like I used a third dark shade of like the saturated blue, or like I used the second shade of the muted green,
or just the third across, 2 down. Like it's pretty simple to
and it's got a nice aesthetic there. Like I think like we quite like the color. Maybe we'll have more colors in the future, if we find a good new amount that we are willing to add to it.
Will we ever get a mug to hold drinks in? This is flipping amazing. Why do we not have mugs to hold drinks in, Boramy? This is like a staple of medieval life.
Because maybe the Township people just drink out of bowls, like kind of like
drink out of bowls. Okay.
It's like drinking miso soup. No, like I think we'll probably have mugs. Concept of a drink is, I guess you'll be more like you're drinking soup out of the mugs more than drinks. But maybe we'll have mugs. I don't see too much of a benefit of attaching shield handles to mugs. Maybe it's the difference between a cup and a mug is whether or not you put a handle on it.
But it's worth noting this, along with many other things, add cool character to the game, but they don't add functionality at all. Like there is no reason you barely even need a bowl in the game. You can just drink out of a ladle at this point. Like there's
or out of the pot straight up. Yeah. So it is interesting for us as we talk about mechanics like this, where I think it's really cool. I think it would be great aesthetically, but yeah, we like to try and work out what we can actually add to the I can think of some social mechanics that might be good for them. And that might be something that like if you clink glasses, like it buffs up the thing you're drinking a little bit. Little things like that, I think it could help incentivize people to use these like small objects.
Will we add a crafting skill shrine?
Potentially, yes. What always comes with designing a skill shrine is whether or not there are valuable enough skills to build up a skill tree for it. Crafting is pretty good because, and I'm talking about like hammer and nail crafting, not just putting things together, because there's like a bit more skill and nuance to them, and there's a good amount of progression stuff. But it's very much, there's only one instance of this. There's just that mechanic of like hammering and nailing stuff, and so I think, but it is something that's going to expand into other like the concept of crafting is going to expand into other things that might mean that maybe we need to, like maybe that's going to decide how the tree is going to get built together. And also, I know that the moment that we start to play around with skill trees, it's going to resurge a lot of the people's desires for various skill trees and various skills to be worked in different ways. And so we want to be able to be in a position to take that on all at once, rather than being like, yeah, we did a little bit of this, but we can't do the thing that people have thoughts on with the current skill tree system.
Okay. Are we thinking of adding? I'm not sure if this is related to houses, but we'll let it slip in. Are we thinking of adding a guild master? Give the guild master semi-admin abilities to create guild using something like a friends function. Now they've said to make guests. Now it sounds like it's about houses, but the idea of like a clan leader who can somehow assemble a clan, I guess, is the question. Is that something we'll ever think about?
I think so. It's going to be on a how involved it is and like what benefits you really get from it. We'll probably I don't think I can say right now. In the last Altacast, we talked about the the Adventurers Guild concept with like the quest making and things like that. And so I think in that Altacast we talk a little bit about how your personal guild party might be like a faction that partakes in these quests, and that you have like a ranking within the overarching meta adventures quest guild. So that might be that's probably one of the biggest avenues that your guild might play a role in, is with the questing stuff from not last I guess the one before that, the one where we talk about missions and quests.
Yep. Next question: will there ever be a taming class when creature taming comes out?
Again,
I'm not sure if this is something. Yeah, this is someone making a presumption, or we've somehow confirmed this without me knowing. But...
No, I mean we've definitely talked about taming creatures in like Altacasts and like Discord and stuff like that, because that's kind of the direction we want to take with pets and mounts, which is with a bit of like wrangling that has to happen. Whether there's a taming class depends on how thorough the taming experience becomes. We don't necessarily create a mechanic with the full intention that it's going to become a skill tree. We try and make sure that the mechanic itself is like that is fun, that it has a good amount of variables involved, and then as we're in the middle of it, we kind of establish whether or not, okay, I can see this expand into a skill tree because we can go into these other avenues that have been open to us, and maybe there isn't, in which case we wouldn't make a tree. Sometimes there are pseudo professions that are that aren't specializable in this kind of way. Like climbing is something you can be good at, and you might be the official climber of your party, but we don't have a climbing skill tree.
That's housing related. What's the class question?
Another class question.
Do you have any thoughts on another combat class or paths for skills? E.g., mage skill paths, spells, scrolls, bomb masters, fighter skill paths, sword, shield, great weapon, swift master, rangers, skill, bow, crossbow, gunner masters.
Really specific variants of like a fighting style are probably going to be part of the same tree. Something that we're kind of considering is a different method of leveling within a specific skill tree. So whilst as like for example, like let's take there are a lot of ranged weapons there talked about with like bows, slingshot, and crossbows. Maybe to get the first level skill of all of those trees, you can just do archery and you'll be able to access each one individually. But something that might change is if you want to go further within that tree, then you have to perform the action of that skill. And so that means that if there's a crossbow skill, you can only access what branches off of it if you've been using that crossbow skill a lot. That kind of means that you can't farm by doing the most basic action possible for a skill, which is a current trend that I know people do. You know, they just kind of bash things with a flint or like a stone to try and level up. Eventually, you know, if you want to progress further down the tree, you'll have to use that skill, and that means that we don't need like a gazillion trees for all these different things. We can have one tree, but then it branches a different way. So I can say I'm a ranger, and Joel's also a ranger, but he's a bow ranger and I'm a slingshot ranger. Kind of giving. Yeah.
We've already got a little bit of a glimpse into multiple types of gameplay in one skill tree with the range already. Like we've got the quick draw and then the slow draw skills, and obviously they're not compatible. You're not going to be taking a quick shot and a long shot at the same time. So there's an aspect where someone who's going birch bow style might find the quick shot is the kind of avenue they want to go down, where someone who's going for a ash bow, I guess, might prefer to go for the longer draw. And obviously that could delve into quite deeper trees about quick drawing and slower drawing.
Yeah.
This person is asking, will belt docs ever get a visual update? It would be nice to see pouches. Okay, so it sounds like they want to see the pouches on their belt rather than orbs on their belt.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And let's answer that first, and then there's the second part of the question as well. So we did talk about it at some stage. Some of the problems that we faced with putting a pouch on a belt is just the UI aspect of it. Like pouches, currently we show the image on the front. We talked about, but if we put a pouch on their belt, maybe we can show the image on the top or something, make it a bit different. But the point is there's kind of like just implications and issues with trying to make pouches look good on the belt.
Yeah, there's still like a bit of a difference, I suppose, that has to happen between the two. Like it can't just be your pouch straight up on your belt. It has to, we have to have this added element, and then it was a matter of whether or not it was totally worth having. It is something that I could see changing, like maybe because I know it looks better when you're looking at the player to see pouches rather than kind of the bubble dock. But part of what's good about the bubble dock is that it's a fairly universal concept. You might see it on a shelf and you can recognize what it is, and it behaves almost the exact same way that it does on your belt. And that kind of leads to the second half of that question, which is how has staying away from UI elements impacted development? And then a hardening message to tell us to keep up the good work. Thank you. Stay away from UI elements definitely makes us think quite heavily about how every interaction plays out. I think the biggest difficulty is always explaining how something is working, because we're essentially creating our own mechanical inventions to get things to work. We don't go firstly, we could go very realistic with it, where we create how the real life medieval equivalent worked, but neither you nor us know how that works without doing research. So there's no real point doing that. We're better off creating a more simplified version and kind of streamlining it as much as possible. And then the other aspect is how we divide that up, because some things do benefit from being a bit more meta UI-ish. Like a lot of the main menu interactions we keep fairly one-dimensional. You pull a lever, you get a board, and then you just flick switches on and off. There's no pull and crank and twist the bubble and put the pumpkin in the bucket and then you get comfort vision for your character. We don't try and abstract that too much with physical interactions, because that gets too confusing. But for the game wise, it makes us this can lead back to how Joel and I are developing housing. So we'll make a call back to this question when we explain some of the nuances of housing.
There's also things, just because it's a video game, that don't make sense. You stamp a gold bar and you get 5 coins. If stamping a gold bar made 1 coin, that probably would have been super simple. You put in a bar, you stamp it, and on the plate is a single gold coin, and that would make sense. But because it makes 5 coins, it would be a bit odd to pull it down and lift it up and see a pouch there of 5 coins. Like, it's at that point it's a bit odd. But also from a rhythm and gameplay perspective, we found that, you know, we wanted to be able to stack up an auto dock and make that sort of thing nicer. And so there's a lot of situations where we're trying to make things physical and engaging and interesting in that regard. And obviously the last thing we want is some flat 2D pop-up UI in front of you. But yeah, we gotta work out when to cut corners and make it a little bit more UI. So we have completely physical, then we have like the dock level of UI, which is a bit more meta. And then we have stuff like when you add someone as a friend, you're popping up this inner menu and then grabbing a card and giving it to them. It's getting a little bit more meta and meta, but we're still trying to hold on to that concept of not showing up a 2D panel.
Pretty much for the things that we want to keep out of your way, we lean the meta side, like the and then things that we want other people to see you doing and interacting, and that's part of like the appeal. That's where we try to keep it, and that's usually with more gameplay mechanics. Like the closest thing we have to like a standard UI is probably like the screenshot camera with the buttons, but we wanted to replicate like a touchscreen type of interface and kind of like a tablet. So that's like very specific to that we want to use like these tapping interactions.
The camera is a bit interesting because it's a bit of a freebie item. Like, we put in the mechanic where you actually put the scope onto it and you can get a zoomed up camera. But other than that, the camera is entirely a freebie thing, and we had to have the discussion, do we want more control so you can have filters and focus and stuff, or do we want to not have any control but keep it quite physically clean? And there reaches a point where with a feature like that, it is purely for functionality. Like, you want to take a screenshot, you don't have to line up your face and hit the print screen key on your keyboard. Like, it's purely for like meta functionality reasons. So it made sense that would be a little bit less in the world. Anyway, that's done. This is a really odd question. I'm not sure we'll have an answer. Where on the metaphorical priority list is fixing ore spawning inside the walls of the mines? Basically, first come, first serve, after like 3 trips down to the lower layers if you want any ore. I mean, there's 2 parts to this question. One is like ore spawn rates. I would love to hear server owners' opinions on this, whether they actually have issues with their mines being stripped out. Generally, when we hear issues about mines being stripped out, from my experience, it's US 1 or US 2, which, spoilers in case you don't know, has over 100 new players on it pretty much every single day. So it's not really just 1 or 2 people going down there. It's the fact that there's a new person going down there every 10 minutes or whatever, and the spawn rate is every 15 minutes or something. So it's really not balanced for that many people going down. In terms of fixing issues with spawning bugs, the mines are a bit of a kerfuffle in terms of development. They're a little bit of a black box that only myself and Boramy, to some extent, even I would say both of us don't even know, but it's kind of a black box that, like, it's a bit harder to work on and work with, and that's one of the reasons it hasn't really gotten heaps of content.
I would say that Joel knows how it works and I know how it's configured. I suppose is like the two. And like I know how it's configured to a certain level, and Joel knows a deeper level on it. The ore spawning inside walls is kind of it's a bit of a, I guess, physics check uncertainty kind of cast. Essentially, we spawn something somewhere, and then we have to know from that point where around this like area do we start checking for a wall. It's kind of like this 3D. It's a very 3D problem, and that's part of the reason why. Also, in the tutorials, you might experience sometimes where it feels like maybe there's no ores spawning, but because a lot of them have appeared inside of geometry. The good thing is like that's a kind of one solution problem. That we can tackle this thing fairly locally, and it should apply to a lot of things. But it is like a fairly complex 3D problem that is just difficult to solve. Yeah.
You just froze for me.
Yeah, you froze as well.
Am I frozen?
Yeah, you're frozen. Let me check
sorry. Just talking over you.
Let me check my speed. My internet's pretty solid. Yeah. Okay.
Your visuals are now rapidly accelerating to catch up.
Yeah, they were doing that for you earlier. I just kept quiet about it.
Something. Can I keep talking?
You want to keep talking about this, or you want to do a different question?
No. I was going to say something similar to what Boramy said earlier with the skills. Is that there's quite a chance some of these issues will address more deeply when we go. Okay, let's actually set aside a decent amount of time to address the mines, whether that be changing up some of the tech or kind of doubling down on the tech and working on new biomes or something. Like at that point we're in more of a position and to deal with things a bit more deeply, I guess. That being said, maybe it'll just get fixed one day. Maybe, it'll pop up on our, it'll be something that we see as enough of a priority to just get done. But sometimes it is hard to say. Another question related to skills. Any plans on changing how experience works?
We kind of touched on that. We're talking about how using a skill rather than the base interaction to level up skills and go further than that tree. That's probably the first main direction that we're going to try and take skills in.
Yeah. I assume part of this question is the discussion of damage versus efficiency as well. Do we have any opinions on that, or nothing official yet?
Nothing official yet.
What's your favorite mechanic in the game, and what's the thing you've made that you like the most?
I really like blacksmithing personally. I wish that almost everything in the game was harder to forge, so that I could spend more time on at the forge blacksmithing things.
Yeah.
I really like climbing. That's just always a blast. I love doing the tower. And item-wise, I like this slingshot and the net the best, because they're two really simple items that just have so much functional value out of them. And out of slingshot specifically, I really like the Gotera orbs. That's my favorite item to shoot, because I love the idea of just being someone who just focuses on stunning enemies. I don't care too much about being the damage dealer. I just want to interrupt enemies.
Yeah.
And yes, and I worked on all those things to a fairly deep degree. So I guess those are the things that have made that I like the most.
This is a tough question, because they're all different. I like things for different reasons. I think the forest, for instance, is every time someone posts a screenshot of a forest that they're like, this is a cool view, it makes me feel really good about myself. Because I'm even though I've never seen this is something that, my code has made. And I think part of what excites me about the forest is the fact that I know it has potential for more things as well. Even if we don't realize that potential yet in the game. the caves kind of does the same thing for me as well. I think it's cool, and I know there would be more potential to it that's not necessarily fully realized. But then other things, like I remember working on wood cutting, and that was just really fun. It was just a fun mechanic. The first time a tree dropped, I was so happy. I was like, oh yeah, watch that tree drop.
Yeah, you can watch the woodcutting video on our YouTube channel to see some of like our initial experiences with woodcutting, to see how excited we are about it.
And just like, but development in general is just constantly, let's say, a combination of stressful and fun, but it's always fun. Like there's always bits of like me and Boramy working on house building now, like all testing is like,
it's pretty fun.
Fixing's not, but testing new stuff is always a blast.
There's so much we can say about the house building testing process that Joel and I have that makes it really fun, because it's like a very new environment in which we can have these small additions that can have a huge impact on how this mechanic plays. And that's probably like, if I didn't want to say housing for the answer to this question, but I think housing has a lot of cool stuff.
Something that's interesting, I find, this is unrelated to the question at this point. Something interesting I find about development is the fact that it's always a continuous blend between excitement and disappointment. Because I think Boramy and I, as anyone who's talked to us in the Discord will know, we're both very, very ambitious people. And we set very high standards for ourselves as well. And sometimes features just don't work as perfectly as we would like, or as nicely, or we need to compromise on design in some way, because you literally, for instance, let's say with climbing, it would have been awesome if we could support foot tracking in a fully like immobilized in the air version of VR, but like VR does not have that. And so we have to constantly be making compromises and decisions. And so it's this constant blend of excitement about things working and disappointment about like, we're not really going to be able to do that sort of thing. And I think in general, the development experience is just a very enjoyable thing. So even mechanics that are less complex or interesting in and of themselves in their final product, the journey to actually get them there is quite exciting. So blacksmithing, working on blacksmithing, for instance, was quite interesting for me because I didn't have VR at the time. And so I was literally using flycam, picking up stuff, flying to the smelter, dropping it in, and then like all sorts of just weird things, me trying to develop a feature without VR, but also test with the physical nature is very fun, even though putting stuff in a smelter is not necessarily the most engaging task. So, anyway. How are we going time-wise?
We're over half an hour, so we'll answer one last question.
Okay. And for anyone who asked house building questions, we'll answer them probably next Altacast, I imagine. We answered that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of them are housing related. Yeah, I mean, we can wrap up now. I think us finishing on that is not a bad note. Like finishing on what we like the most about what we built. I don't want to end on like a more sullen question because we're trying to pull our punches with housing. All right, so yeah, that's the Altacast Q&A. Thanks a lot for your questions. Feel free to drop more questions. I'm not sure yet what the next Altacast topic is. Maybe it'll be housing related. I don't know yet. Maybe there'll be another topic that comes to mind. Thanks again for your patience with the latest update. I know there were quite a number of issues, but the team is hard at work on it. And yep, that's it.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Don't forget to subscribe.
And if you like what we're doing,
hit the bell button. Show this video to your parents and your grandparents and your siblings.
I was gonna try and support a program, but you can show it to your grandparents as well.
Yeah, and put a link to it in your next school presentation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye bye.